Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Call this meeting of the Outdoor Adventure Commission to order. I'm pretty sure we have a quorum between everyone who's here in person and also online. Appreciate everyone's taking some time to join us today. This is the first meeting that we've had in a little while. We've had quite a few of our recreation workshops, and so we'll be getting an update from Beth. Today is first item here is presentation on changes to the OHV Advisory Committee rule from Chase.
All right, I'm good to go. All right, so our OHV Advisory Committee rules coming up for expiration, so we are going through re-upping the Division of Outdoor Recreation. That's our primary change because it was under Utah State Parks. The second change is that secondary is adjusting that 12-person council to but changing one member from a representative from PLIPCO and then a SAR representative that's recommended from the Sheriff's Association. So other than these changes, the administrative rule at the OHV Council is relatively the same.
You don't have to take action on this? Okay.
Yeah, it's notification. If there is any comments from people, we can take that right now.
Yeah, and I didn't ask for any public comments, but I don't know if we have anyone online or here that's here for public comment, which is a vote. So it sounds like this is an action item for us to vote on electronic meeting resolution. Shane.
Hi, I'm Shane Stroud. I think I've met some of you, but 22 general session by House Bill 22. It doesn't represent much of a change from from how the OAC has actually been conducting its electronic meetings, but it just clarifies how electronic meetings take place and specifically how folks are counted for purposes of voting. So let me just go over. I know you received a copy of the resolution. I made a couple changes from the copy that was sent, electronic, not telephonic, so I just struck that from the resolution so that it's more consistent with the language of the statute. So the substance of this resolution, it provides that members of the OAC attending electronically are counted as present for purposes of a quorum, so those online can vote and participate just as those in person. It provides the notice of the meeting should indicate that some folks may participate electronically, and it provides the OAC will have a physical space for members of the public to attend the meeting. That's this location. It can move to another location. You just have to give notice of that. It provides the chair can hold a meeting entirely electronically if the anchor location is closed for health or safety reasons, or if the chair determines that health or safety dictates it should be closed. This is something that came about during the pandemic, and it's echoed there in House Bill 22. It provides the record members of the OAC that are appearing electronically. That could simply be Representative Stenquist saying, we have so-and-so and so-and-so online today. The vote is unanimous. And I think we discussed in an earlier meeting this year how it's probably best practice to just take all votes via roll call vote so that that's on the record. I think, like I said, the OAC is already doing this for the most part, so it should not represent much of a change, but the bill does require this resolution, and it requires it to be passed before the end of the year. So that's why it's...
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions about this? Questions for Shane? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll motion to accept this resolution as presented.
Okay. And we have a motion and a second, as has been recommended. I don't know, if we have someone that can call out names, I mean, I could do that, but, or we just go around the room, but, and I have to remember who are voting, because we have some that are voting members and some that are not voting members. Okay. Well, we'll start down here with Michelle,
Aye.
Vicky,
Aye.
Jeff,
Aye.
Ty,
Aye.
Chase.
Aye.
Who else is a voting member? Tom?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye as well. And Kelly?
Aye.
All right. It's unanimous and passed. So thank you very much for bringing that up and presenting it. And maybe before I go on to our next agenda item, I didn't do a very good job of welcoming everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Representative Jeff Stenquist, Chair of the Committee of the Commission. And I also want to point out that we have some changes to the Commission. Kevin Lewis has officially had to resign and move on. He's appointed by, he's the joint appointment between the Association of Governments and League of Cities and Towns, and so they're going to have to find a replacement there. And then we also have in the audience here our former director of the Division of Rec, Pitt Gruey, who is still here, but not hopefully still will be able to participate with the commission. But official changes to the makeup and the appointments to the commission will have to be taken care of through official channels. So again, thanks everyone for joining. Next, we have our regional planning presentation by Dr. Jordan Smith from the Institute of Tourism and Outdoor Recreation. So, time is yours.
Great, thanks Representative Stenquist. Thanks for making it to various corners of the state over the past 3 or 4 months, I guess, 3 months when we've done these workshops to collect data to help inform the development of the statewide outdoor recreation strategic plan. I want to cover a few things today. One, to first jump back and look at the overall scope and timeline of where we're at in developing the strategic plan. One, to step back, look at the overall scope of this strategic planning process and where we're at in collecting data and hoping inform the decisions of the Outdoor Adventure Commission. Second, to start to look at some of the data that we have compiled, particularly on the ways that outdoor recreation and tourism is funded throughout the state. And then look at some of these broad findings that have come out of the 7 regional workshops that we've talked. If you remember, I presented this idea for the Institute of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism here at Utah State, or up at Utah State, to really act as a facilitator in collecting information from different stakeholders across the state in identifying critical needs, common needs across the different association of government regions, to start to compile a statewide database on outdoor recreation assets and really facilitate the process of feeding that information back up to the Outdoor Adventure Commission. And so the underlying theme here in all these efforts, in whether we're collecting this qualitative information through the workshops, the underlying theme and that motivation really is to have the best available data and science to make more informed decisions when it comes to either dispersing grants or dispersing grant monies to different municipalities, counties, and agencies across the state, or when it comes to actually making decisions as the Outdoor Adventure Commission on recommendations to the state legislature, either this upcoming legislative session or the subsequent one. And so that's our underlying goal, is to have data and information really feed the decisions of the Outdoor Adventure Commission. We had laid out this process of having the short-term goals that we had identified and we had talked about before were really in identifying the immediate needs for this upcoming legislative session. What are the existing programs and policies where we recognize there's a common need across the entire state, where we recognize there's some real advantages to be gained if there was some immediate action taken. And really the data that's going into identifying these will be some that I shared today. Workshops that we'll be holding in the spring, and the data that we're able to collect over the next few months. And that really requires some feedback from the Outdoor Adventure Commission on the specific types of programs and policies that you would like us as a research team to really dig into when it comes to looking at their comparative advantages relative to other states, or whether or not these policies and programs would offer a comparative advantage if they were put in place within the state. And what those types of findings from statewide threats and needs, I really want it to be a discussion of these potential policy solutions, policy recommendations that we've identified, and really giving us some direction on whether or not these are recommendations that you would like us to look into in a systematic way over the next few months to prioritize a few of the recommendations or prioritize ones more than others, so we have some direction to go forward with when it comes to looking at how a specific policy might be put in place within Utah, or our research team really needs a lot of that feedback. And then you can see the long-term goals there of the strategic planning process really to our identify priorities for continued investment in outdoor recreation assets over the long term, really that 5-10 year time horizon. So the time has gone quickly, and a lot of the work that we've been doing so far really has been leveraging, or really has been focused on the convening of the stakeholder engagement workshops. The regional stakeholder workshops were just at the very tail end of those which we've held over the past 3 or 4 months. And we're still in the process of collecting and compiling all of the outdoor recreation assets across the state. One of the critical things in those workshops was highlighting and showcasing all of the data that we had compiled so far, which, if you got a chance to participate in those workshops, hopefully was somewhat impressive when we got a big map that was 8 foot by 16 foot across the region. That it actually was impressive. But that's only what we found through these workshops, really a small portion of the outdoor recreation assets that do exist. There's still a lot that we're trying to track down. And my team at Utah State is doing their due diligence, being as annoying as possible, emailing all the GIS techs in the municipalities and the counties to get that data into us. So I don't have, and that includes not only the assets, but all of the thousands and thousands of sticky dots that we were able to collect information on critical threats to outdoor recreation assets across the state. So what we have kind of looking forward is some broad trends, some broad needs that have come out of these workshops so far. I'm going to highlight a couple of those today and get the feedback from the Outdoor Adventure Commission so we can move forward with this. One of the key aspects that we're just about ready to launch into is this: policies or recommendations are going to be implemented. What are the other states that we can look to see where they've been done very well, and what are the states that we can look to that already have implemented those policies, so I can identify the things that haven't worked well for them. So I'll get into some of those specific recommendations a little bit later on. So one of the things that we have done as part of this process of compiling data on outdoor recreation programs and information was really answer the first question of how is outdoor recreation and tourism recommendations for what types of programs, policies, or agencies need additional support, or what types of strategic alignments need to happen as a result of the development of this plan. So my graduate student that's working on this project, Casey Trout, has been earning, I think, some special credit in understanding and reading state code and trying to understand how different programs and policies since the inception of tourism throughout the state. And this is really intended to provide the Outdoor Adventure Commission with a high-level overview of what exists, what money is coming from the state legislature or is being collected from Utah residents to fund outdoor recreation or tourism throughout the state. And the reason that I combine outdoor recreation and tourism here is because there's really two sides of the same house when it comes to outdoor recreation, or of getting out between what these programs and what the counties and more locally are doing. It's really difficult to distinguish between tourism and outdoor recreation. So we combined everything and took a bigger scope to look at outdoor recreation and tourism generally. So what we did was looked at everything that there's a direct line item coming from the state, like registration fees that are generated through off-highway vehicles, compiled everything into one place, and cataloged these different programs or these different organizations, these different programs or projects, grant programs, into one of 5 different categories. You can kind of see those types of funding that we've outlined or categorized these different types of funding across. So this includes everything from the state sales tax that goes back, or organizations that are responsible for administering these grant programs, and identified, make sure that we have the right dollar amounts for what is either being generated through tax revenues, or what is being dispersed through, what's being allocated through the state legislature. So you can kind of see this is rank ordered from the amount, and this is the most recent fiscal year that we have data for. I will point out that disbursement process for the TRCC and the county transient room tax should be directly going to the counties. It's not dispersed obviously through a tax. It's collected through the tax and then dispersed direct back to the restricted account. The new outdoor recreation infrastructure restricted account, Office of Tourism budget, off-highway vehicle account, and the boating account, and kind of down the list. So what we wanted to do with this was really to provide a high-level overview of where outdoor recreation and tourism funding was being distributed to different programs across the state. And if you're here in the room, you have a handout in your stack of papers that has this information on it as well. And we've created what we call these different categories represented in different colors. And so I mentioned we have 5 or 6 different categories across which we've categorized these different grant programs or these different budgets that come from the state legislature. Those 6 categories are education. Those include programs that are specifically targeted at either youth or educating outdoor recreationists, and maintenance. They include just maintenance, so monies that just go to maintaining existing facilities, marketing and promotion dollars, and then research as well. So those are really the 6 big buckets that we saw, or 5 buckets, and one of them's combined. And this is kind of how they break out, with the individual grant programs or the individual budgets shown relative to the amount of annual appropriations or the amount of monies that they generate. So the bigger boxes that you see, there's more money being generated and more monies coming in or being allocated by the state legislature. Everything we typically think of as tourism, and really has historically been under the purview of Vicki and the Office of Tourism's programs. Everything on the right-hand side is more typically the outdoor recreation investment, outdoor recreation infrastructure and management budgets. And you can see the individual programs and grants that are broken out that you kind of see here across the different grant programs, or the way that we've categorized these different streams of money that fund outdoor recreation and tourism.
So it looks as though I see some one-time money and some ongoing money, and you're treating it all the same.
Yeah, that's a great question, Vicki. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. We're thinking ahead to think of what is the actual funding outlook for outdoor recreation and tourism for this upcoming funding. And so we did lump it all together for the purposes of saying what's really on the horizon, the immediate horizon for the state for this upcoming fiscal year. And so everything that you see there, the EOT, EDA implementation grants, the EDA product development studios, and I believe the EDA economic feasibility impact studies, those are one-time monies that are just for this particular year. They might be a couple years, Vicki, I can't remember, but they're short-term.
Highway vehicle account, the boating account, state parks have some of those monies for maintenance. The recreational trails program, it looks like that's both for infrastructure and maintenance. But those are very targeted into those particular types of activities, and so that's, I think, some maintenance infrastructure or maintenance funding or options to use some of this funding for maintenance, I think, is something that we want to keep in mind. I will mention that having worked with, having been in some discussions with both DNR and the legislative fiscal analysts and legislative leadership, we do have a framework for how the new outdoor venture infrastructure restricted account will likely be talked about having it have a maintenance component to it as well.
So my recollection was that the OR budget this year was larger than what I'm seeing here, but I can't remember the specifics. Like there was the one
Infrastructure restricted account. I think this is what we anticipated from a dollar figure. So this is what this isn't a surprise to me.
Okay, it all makes sense to you.
Part of it. Well, just that one line item that was about the estimate that we were given when we ran the legislation.
What is the $130 million that was in my head?
Maybe in the session before that park investment,
Yeah, I think,
the combination of all that.
yeah, that federal funding that was being dumped on the state at the time, so.
Just one, oh, I guess, just one thing. Some of that outdoor adventure restricted account obviously goes into state parks, and, 5 million went into the York program, so kind of is a blending.
For boating and for off-highway vehicles, you get funds, both those divisions get funds from fees associated with registration, is that correct? And then you can spend all of those funds, or do you have to give any over to the general fund? Or do you get supplemental appropriations from the general fund? Are you self-sustaining, I guess, is my question on your fees?
The OHV fund actually that money actually comes to SITLA from registration damage. And we use that. There's a certain amount that can roll over from year to year, but we use that. We work with counties to help put easements in place that they purchase from us that keep it open to OHV use and repair damage and do things like that. So that's the OHV account. I can speak to that one.
Does that go directly to SITLA, or does it go through the division go through the OHB division?
My understanding is it comes directly to SITLA.
Okay.
Yeah, from my understanding, a portion of that goes directly to SITLA when they.
The OHV program funded.
So through the registration dollars that come through, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ty, same with boating.
Well, yeah, you also have gas taxes that are coming in and coming with that. We're the same registration, gas tax, and then we also get a reimbursement from the United States Coast Guard through a grant for boating.
Your gas tax is a percentage of the state gas tax?
On the county transient room tax, I'm not seeing that it's broken down into the part that's dedicated for maintenance and it's roughly 50% of the total county transient room tax goes to maintenance. Looks like this might all be represented in marketing.
Yeah, and that's true, and it really depends upon which county, which tier of county you're in, right, and how much of that is segregated out, if there is that portion that needs to go to maintenance. A couple of things that I did want to highlight from this is that this, the entire left-hand side of the house of the funding for outdoor recreation and tourism is really administered and has a lot of deference to the counties and how that money is spent, with guidance from the Office of Tourism. But it's not all, I think, good point, Vicki, that it's not all just marketing and promotion, that there are a lot of opportunities through either TRCC dollars or through the county transient room tax dollars. The restaurant tax and the car rental tax, short-term rental tax can be used for recreation facilities, convention facilities. I think most commonly it's used for those large-term capital investments like convention facilities, but recreation facilities is how it's written into the code as well. So that's one thing just to point out. And the county transient room tax can support sports and recreation facilities and related facilities, and acquiring land, leasing land, and making payment of recreation tourism or conventions in counties. So we have had some conversations with the destination marketing organizations, county leads, on how they are funding their tourism programs and how they're funding outdoor recreation programs to generate this information. And it does seem that there is a lot of the variability in how those counties are applying the funds. Some thinking can only be used and has historically only been used for marketing and promotion, but there is some flexibility within the code and how it can be allocated, particularly for outdoor recreation funding streams that currently do exist. Other things that I wanted to mention, that everything on the right-hand side of this funding structure really is outdoor recreation, and is primarily distributed or managed by the Division of State Parks and the Division of Outdoor Recreation. That state park fees restricted account that you see is the biggest chunk, and that is the fees generated. I want to consider, and these really focus on education and research. And again, I mentioned that education funding was funding that is specifically dedicated and restricted by the state legislature to be spent on educating either visitors or youth about responsible outdoor recreation ethic, or the value of getting outside, anything that might be related to outdoor recreation, and in its benefits or its how it can be participated in a safe and responsible way. And so education-specific funding is only 1,000 research, so that includes my budget up at Utah State University and how much money we get, which is relatively small relative to the if you just segregate out education, it's even a smaller slice than that. So that includes our Hunter Education Program and the Outdoor Classroom Grant, which is administered by the Division of Outdoor Recreation. And I think Tara, you might have mentioned that it was only one time, or it expired. It's not an ongoing funding.
The Utah Children's Outdoor Recreation Education Grant.
Yeah. So that's the broad trends here when we look at this entire funding map across the state. Any other questions or thoughts?
One additional thought is that it's really useful to start to see large visual blocks, and then also to see that some of these clarifications will change the visual blocks a fair amount. When you account for the county infrastructure portion and the TRCC that goes to infrastructure, so forth. So I look forward to seeing those working. And then there are small tweaks that aren't going to make a big difference. But for example, what do you do with the fact that we voluntarily choose to use a lot of our marketing money for education? But those are much smaller tweaks that aren't going to change the visuals much.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Vicki. And one of the recommendations that will come up, and I'll chat about here in a second, that's particularly come up out of the workshops, is how do we get an opportunity, or how do we leverage programs, the county DMO and the marketing campaigns that the Office of Tourism has developed and implemented and put a lot of resources into, to really build up those smaller components, those education-specific components. So how do the existing, programmatic infrastructure, that the map is not who's getting the most and one agency or one organization should get more than another. It's how do we better balance the different ways that the money is getting spent across these 5 different broad buckets of infrastructure, maintenance, education, and infrastructure investments. Through those discussions that were extensive and I think really a lot valuable for a lot of the participants in those workshops, I kind of give you a rundown on how many people we had participate and the feedback that we've gotten. And then I'd identify some potential state-led solutions that might be fodder for the Outdoor Adventure Commission to discuss in thinking about these short-term recommendations for the state legislation across different agencies, across different organizations and municipalities, and really a one-time opportunity to do this through this development of the strategic plan. So thanks to you for showing up for at least one or 2 of these workshops. I think everybody on the commission made it to at least one. A big thank you to the Division of Outdoor Recreation, particularly Carly, who pulled together the accommodations for the venues and the food. That really was a big lift for making these happen. So overall, we had 213 workshop participants. That at each of the 7 workshops, we had representation from all the major federal land management agencies within each region. So that's primarily the BLM, the Park Service, and the Forest Service represented and participating in these discussions about how the state engages in outdoor recreation and tourism specifically. So even though this is not a federal land management planning process, I think it shows a really eagerness amongst the federal land management agencies to get involved in planning discussions. And I think this series of workshops really showcase that they want to have a stake in managing outdoor recreation regionally and not just at their own facilities. And they realize, I think, that a lot of those decisions need to happen outside of their formal planning processes. So I think this is a good opportunity to do that. All 29 counties were represented, particularly the DMOs were very strong in coming out. And I wish we had, as far as our recommendations, include things that really came out of the questions that were the core of our workshops. The threat assessment, where we were asking individuals to engage in this discussion about what are the biggest threats to outdoor recreation, and you see here for the Uinta Basin region as an example, but we did this for the same structure for all of our regional workshops. And then have them start to talk about the policies, programs, or projects that can minimize these potential. And they really include these 4 things. So within what is their statutory requirements, and they don't have a lot of opportunities to interconnect and have these discussions that were really facilitated through some of these workshops. So there really is no formal process or informal process through which those discussions can really happen. So that's the second was this lack of information / knowledge about opportunities and responsibilities. So this, I think, speaks to the need for education-related campaigns or more focused programs that are focused specifically on educating recreators about safe and responsible recreation and providing them with information about pre-trip planning information. So we continually heard, or some facilitated way, that this information could be provided in a more systematic or more aligned way across the many different points of contact that the state and even some of the federal partners have with interacting with visitors. I think another good opportunity for the Outdoor Adventure Commission to consider. The next one is kind of 2 sides of the same coin, and not surprising to probably anyone: overcrowding and underuse. Overcrowding at the areas that everybody wants to eat, where counties and municipalities really want to get visitors to, but they just can't quite figure out how to attract them. So this gets at the issue of trying that when they do get to the areas that you're trying to disperse them to, that they have the appropriate infrastructure and resources to actually engage in meaningful and valuable outdoor recreation experiences. And the last one is this unequitable distribution of use and economic benefits. And this is really a product of just the geography of the state and where the population of the state lies, and most of our economic benefits from outdoor recreation and tourism are really accrued along the Wasatch Front, and most of the outdoor recreation is that could come out of these two identified threats. So I'm going to talk about this lack of interagency collaboration and partnerships, and the lack of information and knowledge about opportunities and responsibilities. So the potential state-led solutions that have come up through these workshops really include both formal and informal mechanisms to get the state in a position of leadership to facilitate these discussions across all of the different agencies and stakeholders that are responsible for managing outdoor recreation. Some of the examples that we've pulled together for points of discussion amongst the outdoor adventure financial resources behind the ability or behind those discussions to actually make that collaboration and those partnerships meaningful for the agencies and organizations that are participating in them. So first and foremost amongst these, we've identified programs or policies that there's some precedence for, either looking at Utah or other Intermountain states where there's a program that exists. We can learn from what another state's done, or we can learn from what Utah has done in a similar vein or in a different topic area outside of outdoor recreation. So the first one is a formal arrangement between the state and federal land management agencies to partnership agreements. And I've mentioned this informally with some of you before, but it continually comes up as a very specific way that the state can be put in a position or act as a leader in leveraging state resources against federal dollars to capitalize on this huge influx of money and investment that the state is putting into outdoor. The way that the example has worked here in the state, we do have a forest management shared stewardship program that was signed and agreed on under Governor Herbert, and has since been reauthorized and reapproved by Governor Cox, where there's several $1 million that the state provides to support wildfire mitigation and education campaigns, and then the Forest Service matches that money dollar for dollar. The Forest Service align those monies can count against one another. So I mentioned this because there's a lot of I think there's a lot of value here in thinking about the ways that you can tap into that big pot of money that we just looked at in the mapping structure or the mapping of the funding for outdoor recreation and tourism, and make it even bigger against federal dollars. So I have learned recently that the Division of Outdoor Recreation is an outdoor recreation shared stewardship specific, outdoor recreation specific shared stewardship agreement could be put in place, and whether or not there would be some interest from the Forest Service in matching any monies that would come from the state. Tara, did you want to mention anything about your discussions there, or the possibility of this?
Yes, well, As I've been talking with Representative Stenquist, the Forest Service has indicated that they could set aside a certain amount of funds and be able to leverage many more funds than they might normally get if they knew that there was maintenance projects, restoration kind of things. But it, you know, and it doesn't even have to be an equal match. I mean, we can come in with a third of that, but still, it provides something that is meaningful. And the example had been given previously of the state of Nevada's shared stewardship on recreation, how unfortunately it has, the Forest Service said it's basically a great piece of paper because there was no pledge of any kind of what either side would be responsible for as far. Great, we'll work together. That's what Nevada said. I think it ought to be a little more meaningful here.
I have one question. So the WRI, the Watershed Restoration Initiative, which is something the DNR heads up, SITLA participates in it, BLM, other federal agencies. I wondered if you looked at that at all as sort of a model for this type of thing. Obviously, it's very focused on watershed, but it's used a lot for fire restoration, rehabilitation.
So I'll kind of jump right into that because it is an extension of the shared stewardship model, really, where you're not engaging one specific agency, but it really is a true collaboration where multiple agencies have agreed to put money into one pot that's managed by the state, and they have representation across those different agencies to determine which projects get funded at a specific every year. So 1 year it might be funding. It really depends upon the priority there, but everybody has committed monies up front. So we do have a good precedent here where there's a program that already exists. We've done kind of ancillary work up at Utah State, looking at needs across different land management agencies and landowners across the state. And the general consensus that we've gotten back about the Watershed Restoration Initiative is that it's a huge and develop this formal mechanism where the state can again be put in a position of leadership, where it's a state program. There's some investment from the state, but there's a lot more investment from the federal agencies, all working towards the same goals. So it is a little bit more cumbersome in setting up because you have to have multiple agencies involved in committing those funds, but one that there is, again, some example would not be a wheel that would need to be reinvented if there was a similar program or model that would be set up specific to outdoor recreation. Particularly from the federal agencies, or that existing monies from the state could be leveraged to get some of this money and facilitate some of these interagency collaborations. Because ultimately the goal here is to get agencies working together more closely. And I think if they have some financial commitment, some actual skin in the game, then those programs are more likely to be successful.
I'm talking a lot, but I have worked on some of these things before. Management agency, I will say we collaborate with other state agencies and the federal government all the time. But where something like WRI is so great is when people are on the land, they don't care if it's trust lands or if it's state. They don't care. They just want to be on their trail, and they don't care who owns the land and which land management agency has it. So things like this that can cross boundaries, you can just look at an area and say, we don't care who owns it. You can each put a piece in the pie, and we can look at the overall well-being of this area. Again, for WRI, so to use that for recreational, I think that's a tremendous idea.
Agreements with federal land managers and state land managers to on a specific area. It's been done. I'm not familiar with any that have been done for recreation, but I know that's been done for other things. And I'm wondering if that ever came up in the regional discussions where the county said, look, we have these discussions with our Forest Service manager, our BLM managers. We understand how to work with them, and we could lead an initiative in our county. Did that come up at all?
It did, but it is a very of similar projects or similar models like that have been successful in facilitating collaboration across different stakeholders, very topic specific. So Sage Grouse conservation is a,
that's
is
the
a
one I'm
huge-
familiar with, yeah.
Is the huge one there where there has been a lot of those
Yeah.
collaborative set up across the state. But again, what I'm focusing on here today is the state level needs where we saw the same consistent interagency collaboration. But those examples are a little bit more geographically specific.
Okay.
But yeah, they do exist.
I think as I visited, I went to 5 out of the 7 workshops, and that was something that I really came away understanding at a deeper level, is how critical it is that we have this interagency collaboration, because so many of these lands, with 2/3 of our state being under federal control, it's just really important. And oftentimes there tends to be, friction and a little bit of animosity and between state and restoration or whatever. Recreation, I think, is one of those things that we really do need to work very closely and have very good relationships with our, federal partners, local partners, cities, counties, and really all work together all levels. And that's definitely a challenge. But I think these type of more formal agreements where we can put mechanisms in place to facilitate that collaboration would be fantastic. And I think there's also, even some of the discussions we've started to have with Forest Service, for example, federal government to go into that. If we can get that kind of return on investment, that would be fantastic.
So as maybe a point of future action for the Outdoor Adventure Commission, if you think that there's promise in exploring the idea of setting up a program that looks at the shared stewardship, there's the head of the WRI program come in and talk about the successes and failures and maybe the things that outdoor recreation can learn from what they have already kind of gone through by trial and error in setting up their programs. If that would be helpful, we can build that into the agenda for future OAC meetings if we think it's something that is really worth pursuing.
I'm assuming that whether it's a co-funded, co-managed type, am I correct in that? Or could some of these be done at an agency level? I don't know.
The code for this is kind of skimpy. I mean, it's there, and then the watershed restoration, but it's there, and it is something the Forest Service asked us thing at all. They'd love it to be a lot more like this, and I think that would help us really leverage some of that money. So it does need to be funded on an average basis. Michelle, do you know how they do that? I thought every once
Have legislative action, but so I think that would be very. So to answer your question, Jordan, I think we ought to discuss it, but then I think I would love to see us put some legislation forward. I would love to put some legislation forward to at least maybe provide a framework, something like that. So and where we're getting close to legislative session, I would love to have some of those discussions if there's something we could start with this year, start putting it together. So, but certainly more discussion at the commission with the commission would be fantastic. How do we actually put this together?
Jordan, I have a question about in the 7 workshops you held. Did you learn of any federal, state, local collaborative efforts on recreation areas where that does exist? A similar model to WRI does exist. I'm thinking like the San Rafael Swell Recreation Area. I don't, and it's managed as a unit, I think, but I'm not certain of that. Did you find any examples like that?
Not specifically where there's been monies exchanged and leveraged against each other. So there might be some of those examples that I just can't think of right at the top of my head.
I'm thinking like MOUs of how you
Definitely
handle campgrounds on different pieces of land, recreational trails.
Exist quite a few of those.
Okay.
But I cannot think of any right off the top of my head where there's actually dollars being matched from either the federal agencies or the counties for a specific project or the shared management of a specific area.
Okay.
they might exist.
So some of them may be paper. I'm familiar with Sitla's land swaps and land swap efforts, minerals for monuments, things like that, where you have different value sets of minerals versus view sheds and open space. But has Sitla ever done land swaps for recreation?
We had the Utah Outdoor, gosh, I'm going to forget the exact name, but it was essentially the Outdoor Recreation Land Exchange, which we did a few years ago, where we swapped out things like Corona Arch down outside of Moab and what's called the Dingle Act Exchange, which it's already passed Congress. We've been working on implementing that. So some of that and some stuff in WSAs and things like that we are switching out.
Okay, so that could be an option to look at as well, where you have value where you have land that has no monetary value to you to fulfill the mission of Sitla, but recreation could add value to other pieces that you might be able to trade for. And I'm thinking of like Tabby Mountain. I don't know if you've sold Tabby Mountain yet, but it's got great recreational assets. I don't know how you monetize it very well, but it's got great recreational assets that I think are underutilized.
That's the one up in Cache Valley.
So I guess moving forward on this idea of collaboration and partnerships, if we can help facilitate those conversations with representatives from the Forest Service or the state that have been involved in the shared stewardship programs or the WRI, and maybe get them on the agenda for the Outdoor Adventure Commission at the next meeting in December, that would be great. And maybe even help facilitate some of those conversations over the next few weeks. That would be something that we would be into to compare to other states, because like we're looking at the examples that there's really good precedents for within Utah, but there might be some others across the state. So we can fast track the analysis, the comparative analysis for some of these programs, if you think that this is something that would really carry some weight as a legislative recommendation from the Outdoor Adventure Commission.
I think that's a great idea. I think it would. Yeah. So let's think about doing that.
I don't know the specifics of the financial piece of it, but I'd be happy to help look into that. But the Three Peaks Recreation Area outside of town is co-managed by the county, very much a co-managed area. It's fairly small by Utah geographical standards, but that may be an example to look at of the kind of things that Jeff was asking about as far as models for co-management of recreation areas in the state.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. That really helps. And I think like the Sand Flats recreation area east of Moab and the BLM down there. So we'll take a deeper dive into some of those more regional examples, which is a great segue into the other example that we wanted to highlight as a possible way to help facilitate this collaboration and partnerships across different agencies, and one that we don't have good precedents for in Utah, but has been adopted by Colorado, defined geographically, to really go through this process of identifying needs and allocating that money at a regional level. So what this would look like would be the agency, an appropriation from either the state legislature or be just multiple regions, and then regional working groups or councils could be put in place to identify the critical needs and investment opportunities within those regions. Like I said, this is one that we don't have any experience with here in Utah, but they're doing it with the Colorado Outdoor Partnerships, and they've put a lot of money into establishing these shared management or shared these collaboration-based working group that is a little bit more formal, but it doesn't have the benefit of really engaging federal partners and agencies in contributing to the funding of outdoor recreation management. It's just state dollars going out to a more distributed decision-making process. So not as, I think, appealing and not as advantageous as either the shared stewardship model or the WRI model.
We have a somewhat of a similar model in the CIB here in Utah, where the regional groups, usually following those county organizational maps, they collaborate and make recommendations to CIB, and they take turns getting funding for different projects. Model exists. That's how they divide up that community impact board funding that comes largely from severance taxes in the state.
And are those groups, public groups, or are they nonprofits, or?
CIB is public groups.
Yeah, they're like counties and
Elected
municipalities,
officials,
and
yeah.
versus Colorado? Is it the same thing, or is it?
It's primarily nonprofits that are convening these discussions. And
So you want to get Blue Ribbon Coalition and SUA in a room and have them divide up funds? Because I want to watch that.
this was one that is, like I said, a new evolution when it comes to outdoor recreation funding models. One, I don't know if we could really learn too much by going and talking to Colorado right now. It might be one that they need to kind of sit with, and would probably, I would assume, have a lot of variability where there's some working groups that are very, very successful and some working groups that are and focus more on the shared stewardship and WRI-based models, and then look into this as we have the time into the spring. So the next example that I just wanted to quickly mention was this informal ways that collaboration and partnerships can be facilitated through the state. And it's starting to happen with the new funding and staffing that's within the Division of Outdoor Recreation. And this is really seeing the Division of Outdoor Recreation as a technical assistance program in providing ways for these agents limited to the ability of the division to help the municipalities or counties apply for funding. But seeing the Division of Outdoor Recreation as a technical assistance entity, I think, is one potential prospect that is more informal, that is, I think, in the development and will probably take a little bit of time. But I just did not want to focus exclusively on these formal models, saying that a lot of this collaboration actually happens in a potential there, particularly as the capacity of the Division of Outdoor Recreation ramps up. The next one I wanted to dive into was the second critical threat, and it's the lack of information knowledge about opportunities and responsibilities when it comes to participating in outdoor recreation. And the common need that was expressed across all of these workshops was some consistency for what's appropriate. What do they want to know about how to recreate responsibly or recreate safely? What are the rules and regulations for that particular place? What facilities are available at that particular location? That information just doesn't exist in one place. And so this is a great opportunity, I think, if the Outdoor Adventure Commission really sees formal education campaigns, to recommend aligning the educational and marketing efforts that come from those big funding programs. Engage with education to some extent, the off-hire vehicle program, the boating program. The Office of Tourism does it very kind of indirectly through their co-op marketing programs, and they do it through their new Forever Mighty campaign. And the destination marketing organizations do it a lot through their own discretionary use of those TRT dollars. Statutory mandate to do education. But typically it's been put down 2 or 3 rungs on their responsibility and priority list when it comes to how they actually invest their time and their resources. And so I think one recommendation that the Outdoor Adventure Commission can discuss and consider the benefits of is trying to identify some consistent and unified messaging that comes from the multiple agencies that do have some statutory responsibility for.
After this comment, maybe. I just want to say that I love that idea. In my mind, as this last year, as I've been outdoors, I've thought a lot about the need that we have in the state for the ability for someone to drill down in an app and find out where they are, what they can do where they are, or where something nearby is if they wanted to. App application. I don't know if anyone's used Onyx, but it tells you what land you're on, where trail access is. It's a great GPS-based map. Hunting season just ended, and for the last 6 weeks, I've lived on Onyx in Utah, Colorado, to make sure that I'm where I am, I can do what I'm doing, that I'm legal, that I know where access is, trails, and things like that. That information, I think, is a huge asset that we should be providing as a state, and it seems like it fits under this office.
Can I just add something? And Carly and I met with Jordan right before this meeting to talk about our idea, and it really dovetails perfect with what you're talking about, Jeff, because we're talking about creating a full-on mapping process with not just some of the information that we might even get might be inaccurate, but then I'd seen a presentation many years ago, and I thought, why can't we have all of this data come in? So they had talked about something that the state could own and that other DNR agencies could put information into. So when you're pulling up to a campsite, you know, like say state parks, there are still 17 campsites available. When they just had a recent stocking of fish. And this kind of information, it just seems like we could have that all on one map, but it could have some amazing opportunities. But and then, you know, the Office of Tourism can point people, use this map if you're recreating in Utah and you want to know where things are.
I think there's also opportunities for, you know, public-private partnerships. They're making that data available to, you know, various vendors that provide these types of apps that have a lot of users, rather than, you know, the state doesn't want to get into that business necessarily, but we can provide a data repository that could be made available as well. Yeah. I think that's probably the right role for the state
as an obligation to provide. If you think about recreation and needs of people to find better places and more places, if we can move people off the Wasatch Front Canyons and let them find other areas where they can camp and recreate, I think that's in the public interest. It's worth discussing that, because I wouldn't want to interfere with what the private sector does and does well. But the state has an obligation to help the citizens of taxpayers know what assets that belong to them are available to them and how to utilize
for an app to get access to it. But then you could also make that just the back-end data through some sort of API available as well.
Yeah, Nevada did theirs. We were on the phone with them yesterday to find out how they did theirs. And they hired, you know, it would be the equivalent of our division hiring a part-time GIS analyst just to work on this, along with 2 seasonal field tech employees, data that they'd received, and then, you know, other things that could be. But that's, they did it for a fraction of the cost of what you would pay. You know, so Colorado paid $500,000 for theirs, but it would be really, you know, as easy as doing that, and then it's ours. But so many of these other divisions,
Making sure, just like Jeff was saying, on not interfering with that private sector is everyone has a preference for how they interact with the recreational resource, and like you said, you use Onyx. Some weird people use All Trails. Some cool people use Gaia. Pull the data and put it on that preference of what they have, and so that's what I've been finding out in the field. That's what I've been talking to people about. That's what, you know, at least our OHV program wants is just some resource, a data resource information. We've provided a ton of information to Avenza, Polaris Ride Command, as well as Garmin. So we get constant requests, and that's our duty, is to make sure that that data is available so that their users can use it responsibly and safely.
I also have, and that needs to lie with us. I do agree that it can be done in the private sector, but sometimes economics and making the dollar is what sometimes skews what the safety is. And we've seen it in our programs and how we have it there. And I'm not saying that it's wrong, but sometimes the dollar has a little more influence than doing the right thing that needs to be there. And I think if we can be the clearinghouse for that consistent, or that sound solid place to go. I mean, you start looking at life jackets and what are not life jackets, and it gets you to be pretty crazy as we see that. And I see it every year at the boat show. We see it every summer on the wall. Thanks, just to say, that's it.
I had to step out for a minute, and so I'm coming into this discussion, but I really like where this is headed, and I think DNR has done a lot of really good work, and our office has done a lot of really good work, and play a huge role. But I think there's great potential for our teams at the Office of Tourism and Department of Natural Resources to come together and do more storytelling. I agree with you that it's our responsibility in the public sector to provide that foundational information, because the for-profit companies are thinking about other things than they'll direct traffic to us as the reliable source of information about safety and responsible behaviors, which will also better inform people about all the places out there that they can be dispersing their recreation.
Just an aside is some of the research that had gone into this recommendation. Casey, my graduate student, and Wayne Fryman, who's another faculty member that came to can be tapped into as an outlet to develop some of this messaging, and the extent that they would feel that that's like within their wheelhouse. And as an aside, that there is this movement in destination marketing programs to move towards destination management and more actively focus on mitigating impacts of large events, and actually educating visitors about safe and responsible recreation. So I think this is really one of those great opportunities where there's direction from the tourism side of the house moving towards outdoor recreation programs, and the huge need on the outdoor recreation side, and no really existing programs that have done it very well. So I think if there's an opportunity there to build that relationship, and have the tourism programs and the counties that are involved in marketing and educating visitors, they're the most likely suspects when it comes to actually getting eyeballs in front of information that's going to affect people's behavior. So that's why we had specifics, because they are at the forefront of actually getting information in front of people. So if the Outdoor Adventure Commission sees some value in developing a consistent educational campaign or some consistent educational messaging, I think there really should be at the forefront of the discussion to think about how that's done and how that's done really well, because the other programs, the DNR based programs, just don't have the familiarity and the expertise when it comes to getting things seen and getting things listened.
Chime in from back here, just to highlight some of the things that have been popping up in our chat while we've been talking. One is rewinding a little bit to probably 10 minutes ago. Kate Bradshaw mentioned, I second the need for a central place for entities that want to do projects. Office of Outdoor Rec is great, but not enough. Local entities know where to go to get help. Adams had a good example of promoting safety and non-product land manager relations with the Petzel Rebolt in Chattanooga. And then Kelly Goonan had another example from the Greater Zion area with the regional app. So just wanted to highlight those.
So it seems like
Yeah, thank you, Carly. Manage information and also the state managing information. I think I agree that if this is going to be a statewide initiative, that having some consistency and state support would be wonderful. Higher education institutions throughout the state, and the example that I shared there was folks at Utah Tech, and then I believe Dixie Technical College worked on developing an app for visitors specifically to Zion that address impact and responsible recreation behaviors and things like that. And so I think there are a number of different examples that we could look to, because it does sound like there's a lot of support behind the idea that Jordan's presenting.
Tom also have a point. Tom, hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to call out, there are, I think Vicky's right in her point that a lot of private entities are kind of focus on what they want to focus on, and maybe not necessarily safety or conservation, but here at Petzel, we're about to launch what we call a Rebolt trip, and we have these things called Rock Trip, and they're usually these huge festivals, large parties that bring hundreds, if not close to thousands of people out to climb in an area, and we rebolt and help build trails in an area. We're starting this Rebuild trip, and a lot of it started with the work that we've done here with Salt Lake Climbers Alliance, and we go into, in this case, Chattanooga, and we bring together the local climbing organization, the climbing gyms, the land managers, and we teach them how to responsibly do the work to replace aging hardware and then help to build trails. And the idea is to take this education to communities, bring their communities together and leave them, or go in as good stewards and leave them with the skills and experience and knowledge to maintain those climbing routes and the trails to get there for years to come. And we hope to do that around the country this next year. One of those venues might be here in Salt Lake. But I think there are some companies out there doing stuff like this, but it's a little harder to turn over all those stones and find out who's doing them in your area. So that's it.
So it sounds like there's a lot of enthusiasm and support for this idea, and have some interviews and discussions with representatives from those programs and bring that information back to the Outdoor Adventure Commission so you guys can learn from what has been done before we kind of advance towards a specific recommendation on this particular front. But it does seem like that this is something that there was a lot of consistent response to in those workshops, and a lot of consistent and positive response to amongst the Outdoor Adventure Commission. So that's really good to see. I know we talked about a lot today. This is just the two major threats that we identified in those workshops. Focus on that overcrowding and underuse issue, the two sides of the same coin issue that seemed to be very consistent across the state. And then the last issue, which was the unequal distribution of economic benefits that come from outdoor recreation, and the specific programs and projects that we've identified as potential solutions to address some of those issues. So this was just kind of half of the major recommendations or the major themes that come out of those workshops. Hopefully you've kind of workshops. Our team's still in the process of distilling all of the discussions down to look at very regional specific needs and issues. That's something that we'll be able to report on in subsequent Outdoor Adventure Commission meetings. And then our collective maps of all those ding dots that you had to put on the boards and what those patterns looks like across the state. That's something that we're still working on, and focus on these shared stewardship and WRI based models, and really advance that as something that might be able to see a recommendation and maybe some legislative action for this upcoming year, given that seems to be like the most ripe policy or recommendation to come out of the commission, at least at this point. So that's where we're at. Hopefully the workshops. So that's all I have. Representative Stanquist.
Well, that was excellent and an excellent discussion. I think we have some really good ideas that we can move forward with and really make some progress on over, even as soon as maybe this upcoming legislative session and then for future initiatives as well. So I think this is fantastic. I'll also mention somewhat related is, I was able to join when the governor a paved trail network in the state. So I think that's something that they can tap into active transportation funding for, but also has some nexus with outdoor recreation as well. And so there's not a lot of detail around that yet. It's more of like a big vision idea, but I think that's something that we can be watching and certainly supportive of as well. There are, I've mentioned there's, some ideas being discussed, some potential legislation being put together, but any ideas as we're gearing up for the upcoming session. So any other topics that we want to bring up today? Any other comments from anyone? No? I think it's been a good meeting. Hopefully everybody had a chance to get
I have
vote.
one. Oh, just one for me because I'm not there to do it in person, but everybody should give Vicki a round of applause for her recent Athena Award if you haven't already. It was pretty cool.
Oh, yeah. Good job. So, all right, we have a motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, thanks.
Right.